This little pumpkin right here is the Canon EOS RP, and I am not too proud to say that it has become one of my favorite cameras. I picked it up first a couple of years ago when the price dropped from $12.99 to $9.99. I actually picked it up for $8.99, body only, on a Black Friday sale. And since then, I have just used it tons of times in my studio and in my personal shooting. But what I wanted to talk about in this video today was where this camera is going and a few things I'd like to see Canon add in the next version. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind you quickly that I have a podcast called Photobomb. It comes out every week, and I co-host it with my good friend Boo Ray Perry. Link to that in the description. Also in the description, a link to my new online course, the Headshot Mini Session Survival Guide. This is a great way to use headshot mini session events as a way to bring in thousands of dollars and lots of leads into your business. And if you use the code YouTube at checkout, you can save 25% on that course. Now let's get on with it. Now, although some big YouTubers trashed this camera when it first came out, thanks to a drop in the price and some cool firmware updates, it's kind of become a fan favorite. That doesn't mean that it's perfect though, and a lot of photographers, myself included, especially those of us who shoot video, would love to see them add a few things in the next version, and that's what I want to talk about. Before I jump into my list, let's be realistic about what you can expect a company like Canon to cram into a full frame mirrorless camera under $1,000. I don't think you're going to see an in-body image stabilization system. I don't think that you're going to see a super high resolution EVF or a super high resolution LCD screen or pro-level video features like a really killer preamp, but there are a few things that I think are reasonable to expect that would be a huge upgrade. First up is battery life. Now, if you've switched to mirrorless recently, you've probably noticed that the battery life of a mirrorless versus DSLR is pretty lean. Now, this camera uses the LPE17 battery, which gives you 250 photographs on a charge. Even by mirrorless standards, that's pretty skimpy. Imagine being able to shoot 350 or 400, which is a good upgrade. Still not amazing, but a lot better. Now, if you buy this camera at $9.99, you're gonna have to buy at least 2 extra batteries to do a full day's shooting. So to be able to get that much more battery life out of it would be a nice change for those of us who love this camera. The next thing I'd like to see improved is the dynamic range of this camera. That means improving the sensor. Now, there are even some older cameras, even APS-C censored cameras, that do a better job being able to keep detail in the shadows without the noise. So if you take these even raw files into post and push the shadows, the noise really starts to come out. And I think it's a pretty small and reasonable upgrade to want to get a little better sensor in this camera so that you can push and pull those shadows. Now, that would make this useful for wedding photographers. It would be more useful for landscape photographers that want those shadow details, and something that wouldn't be that difficult because they have lots of sensors lying around that they could use to upgrade it from the one that's in it now. Now, for the next couple of things, I want to get into video. Again, I don't think you could expect a company like Canon to put a full-featured pro video camera set of functions into a camera that costs less than $1,000, a full-frame camera. But there are just a few small things that, if you upgraded them, would make this a lot more useful for everyday intermediate shooters, YouTubers, and vloggers. The first video feature I'd like to see changed in the next version of the RP is the 4K. Not only is it cropped, which in and of itself doesn't really bother me that much, but when you switch into 4K, you lose what I think is Canon's best strength across all its cameras, which is the dual pixel autofocus. So being cropped, losing the dual pixel autofocus, and only being able to shoot in 24p, it kind of makes the 4K almost unusable for serious video shooters. Now, the 1080 is great and it has a lot of good frame rates to choose from. Thanks to some firmware updates, we even now have 23.9 or 24 frames. But that 4K, nobody really even uses it. I don't think it's reasonable to expect Canon to put 4K 120 all-eye compression into an entry-level camera like this, but a few more frame rate options would be a huge win. So if Canon wanted to put 4K full frame dual pixel autofocus with a couple more frame rate options, I don't think it would challenge the high-end cinema lines. I don't think it would cannibalize other cameras that are more video-centric, but it would make the RP, the next version, a lot more useful to bloggers and intermediate users. And the final video settings I'd like to see added for the RP are not anything that's going to require them putting a bunch of new hardware into it. Just some settings that they could put into the firmware that would make it a lot more usable. C-Log, and Zebra settings. Now, the reason I think that these are the most critical is because a less expensive camera, an entry-level camera, is just going to have less dynamic range. It's just not going to have as high an image quality as the higher end cameras like the R5, etc. But if you had the ability when you were shooting video to monitor the peaking with Zebra and to shoot in a flatter profile with C-Log, it would give you the option to be able to manage that limited dynamic range and know when you're not going to be able to get what's in the scene. It would be a huge help and give some really cool tools for those vloggers, YouTubers, and intermediate users. Probably the main argument that people will make is that companies like Canon are never going to pack all these features into an entry-level camera because they're afraid they're going to cannibalize the cameras above them. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I also don't think that would happen. Here's why. First of all, the prosumer and consumer markets are so much bigger than the pro market that companies like Canon have so much more to gain by selling to them than they do to pros because there's just 100 times more of them. It doesn't make any sense not to give those people affordable, full-featured cameras. Second, giving great value through relatively inexpensive feature upgrades rather than huge hardware upgrades can create a lot of brand loyalty, and that means that when someone is gonna buy a new piece of gear, they're more likely to stay with the brand that they have because they feel taken care of. And finally, the purchasing of camera gear always escalates. You're continually gonna upgrade and buy bigger and better stuff the more you learn. So adding a few small pro features like C-Log and Zebra to a low-end camera like the RP is going to let people test drive and learn these new skills that are going to make them quickly hit the edge of what the hardware can do and then upgrade to a better camera as soon as they can afford to do so. And if all of those tasty little features have developed a brand loyalty, then when that person like myself is going to upgrade or buy a new camera, they're also really likely to do it within the same brand. I'm a perfect example of this. The RP was the thing I started my YouTube channel with, and now I have an R5 and a bunch of lenses for that. And I never would have gone that route to buy a camera that's so video-centric if I hadn't been able to test it out on the RP. But I would have loved to have been a little better prepared for shooting in log and color grading and peaking using Zebra settings, other things like that, on the RP. But hopefully in the next version they'll have it. Now at the time of recording this, I've checked out and scoured the internet for rumors on the next RP coming out, and everything I found says that we're probably likely to get 2 different entry-level full-frame cameras in the R system. So that's kind of exciting. Maybe we'll get one that's featured a little more like the RP at a lower price point, and then one that's maybe a little bit more expensive that adds some of these cooler features. So I'll be looking out for that. I'm gonna make some videos on that as more information comes out. Now go into the comments and let me know, do you have the RP? And what do you love about it, and what do you want to see in the next version? If you think I left something out, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and do that stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.